My father handed my brother the company. 60 people applauded. My mother cried as if she were watching the happiest moment of her entire life. My younger brother, Tyler, stood up, lifted his champagne glass, and smiled for every camera in the room. Then my father looked at me, smiled, and said the sentence that finally broke something inside me. "Clara, don't look so disappointed." A few people chuckled. He kept smiling. "Not everyone is meant to be the face of the family." Another laugh. "Some people are simply better behind the scenes." This time people actually nodded, as if what he had just said made perfect sense. My mother reached over and patted my hand like I was a child who had just lost a board game. Tyler raised his glass toward me, almost like a toast. Then he looked away. Nobody noticed that I hadn't touched my champagne. Nobody noticed that my hands still smelled like eucalyptus, because I'd spent the entire afternoon arranging the centerpieces. Nobody noticed the blister on my heel from carrying chairs, flower boxes, and decorations across the community center. Nobody noticed that I hadn't eaten since breakfast, because while everyone else had been getting dressed, I had been making sure my parents' 40th anniversary looked perfect. The flowers, the caterer, the seating chart, the cake, the photographer, every last detail. And now, I wasn't even sitting with my own family. My table was next to the kitchen door, close enough for the staff to find me whenever something went wrong, far enough away that I wouldn't ruin the family photographs. Then my father raised his glass again. "Tonight isn't only about celebrating 40 wonderful years of marriage." He looked proudly at Tyler. "It's about celebrating the future of the Bennett family." More applause. "As of today," he paused for effect, "Bennett Construction officially belongs to my son." The room erupted. People stood. Whistles echoed across the hall. Someone shouted, "Congratulations." Tyler hugged my father. My mother cried harder, and I just sat there, because I knew something nobody else in that room knew. Bennett Construction should have died 6 years earlier. It didn't, because I saved it. Not my father. Not Tyler. Me. I had the loan restructuring documents. I had 6 years of quarterly financial reports. I had the vendor contracts. I had the bank correspondence. Most importantly, I had a $60,000 personal guarantee with my own name on it. If that company had collapsed, I would have been the one paying, not the man giving speeches, not the son accepting applause. Me, the woman they had just told 60 guests belonged behind the scenes. What my parents didn't know, what Tyler definitely didn't know, was that someone else in that room knew every single detail. My grandfather, Walter Bennett, 81 years old, founder of Bennett Construction, builder of half the homes in Millbrook Falls, and for the last 6 years, the only person who had ever actually read every financial report I prepared. He had been sitting quietly at the head table all evening, watching, listening, saying almost nothing. There was a plain brown envelope resting beside his water glass. I noticed it when I first arrived. I assumed it was another set of paperwork. Grandpa always carried paperwork. I had no idea that envelope was about to destroy 40 years of lies. 4 minutes after my father called me background, my grandfather stood up, tapped his cane twice against the wooden floor, and turned the happiest night of my parents' lives into the most uncomfortable one. But before I tell you what happened after he stood up, you need to understand how I ended up sitting beside the kitchen instead of beside my own family, because nights like that don't happen all at once. They happen one small humiliation at a time. My name is Clara Bennett. I'm 33 years old. For most of my life, I confused being useful with being loved. I grew up in Millbrook Falls, Ohio, 40 minutes outside Columbus, the kind of town where people know your grandparents before they know your first name, where everyone waves at each other, where gossip moves faster than the mail, and where your last name matters almost as much as your character. The Bennett name mattered. My grandfather made sure of that. Walter Bennett founded Bennett Construction in 1974 with an old pickup truck, borrowed tools, and enough stubbornness to survive 3 recessions. He built barns, farmhouses, church additions, small businesses. If someone in Millbrook Falls lived under a roof built before 1995, there was a good chance my grandfather had framed it himself. People trusted the Bennett name. My father inherited that trust. Richard Bennett could sell almost anything. He remembered birthdays. He shook hands like every deal was personal. He knew every pastor, every banker, every hardware store owner within 30 miles. But there was one thing my father never understood: numbers. He hated them. Balance sheets bored him. Financial reports sat unopened on his desk for weeks. If a spreadsheet had more than 3 columns, he called me. My mother was different. Carol Bennett didn't care about construction. She cared about appearances. She chaired the beautification committee, organized church fundraisers, hosted charity luncheons. She knew exactly who bought a new car, whose daughter got engaged, who repeated an outfit at last year's Christmas banquet. Image was her full-time job. Then there was Tyler, 3 years younger than me, quarterback, homecoming king, the boy every teacher remembered, the man every older neighbor still called our golden boy. Tyler wasn't cruel, not intentionally. He simply grew up believing life naturally opened doors for him, because it always had. When Tyler graduated from Ohio State with a business degree, my parents threw a party, nearly 80 guests, custom cake, professional photographer. My father gave a speech about the future of the Bennett legacy. When I earned my CPA license, my mother looked up from folding laundry and said, "That's wonderful, honey." Then she smiled. "Did you hear Tyler got promoted? That was our family." Tyler achieved. I helped. Tyler celebrated. I organized. Tyler received introductions. I received instructions. This is our son Tyler. Our daughter Clara is helping in the kitchen. Helping. My mother loved that word. Clara helps. Clara fixes. Clara understands paperwork. Clara doesn't mind. For years, I believed her. Because when you've spent your whole life being rewarded for solving everyone's problems, eventually, you stop noticing that nobody is solving yours. 6 years before the anniversary party, Bennett Construction nearly disappeared. Nobody in town knows that story. Because my father made sure they never would. A commercial client declared bankruptcy. $90,000 vanished almost overnight. Payroll was due. Suppliers wanted payment. The bank was calling every morning. For the first time in my adult life, my father came to my apartment, not as my father, but as a desperate business owner. He walked in carrying 3 cardboard boxes overflowing with paperwork, invoices, tax returns, vendor contracts, bank statements, payroll records, none of them organized. He sat at my kitchen table, ran both hands through his hair, and quietly said something I'd never heard before. "Clara, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do." Those 6 words changed my life. Until that afternoon, my father had always acted as though he had every answer. He was the man everyone called when they needed advice. The man who could calm angry clients, negotiate impossible deals, convince people everything would work out. But sitting across from me, he looked scared, not embarrassed, scared. I opened the first box, then the second, then the third. Within 20 minutes, I realized the unpaid client wasn't even the biggest problem. It was simply the first problem. Invoices had been entered twice. Vendor discounts had expired because nobody followed the payment schedules. Tax credits had never been claimed. Insurance renewals had quietly increased for 3 consecutive years. Payroll reports didn't match quarterly filings. Several contracts had automatic price adjustments that no one had noticed. The company wasn't drowning because of one mistake. It was drowning because hundreds of tiny mistakes had been ignored for years. I looked up. "Dad, when was the last time someone reconciled these books?" He stared at me. "What does that mean?" I closed my eyes. Just for a second. That was the moment I understood. My father hadn't been managing the financial side of Bennett Construction. He had been surviving it. 1 week became 2. 2 weeks became a month. I worked my full-time accounting job during the day. Every evening I drove home, microwaved dinner, opened my laptop, then spent another 5 or 6 hours rebuilding Bennett Construction from the inside out. I renegotiated payment schedules, called suppliers, prepared new cash flow projections, reviewed insurance policies, corrected payroll, organized 6 years of financial records. The bank assigned one commercial lending officer to our case. Her name was Deborah. At first, she only wanted to speak with my father, That lasted exactly one phone call. Halfway through the conversation, she interrupted him. "Mr. Bennett, could Miss Bennett explain the numbers instead?" After that, every meeting included me, sometimes only me. Eventually, Deborah stopped calling my father altogether. She called my cell phone. One afternoon, she looked across the conference table and folded her hands. "Clara, the restructuring can work, but the committee wants additional security." I already knew what she meant. A personal guarantee. She nodded. "The company doesn't currently have enough collateral." My father shifted in his chair. He looked 20 years older than usual. "If we don't?" Deborah didn't hesitate. "The line of credit expires. And payroll?" She looked down. "I can't promise payroll." Nobody spoke. Finally, I slid the guarantee agreement toward myself, picked up the pen, and signed. $60,000. If Bennett Construction failed, that debt became mine, not because I owned the company, not because I earned a salary, simply because I loved my family. When we walked outside, my father hugged me, hard. His voice cracked. "You saved us." I still remember those words, because they were the closest thing to gratitude I ever received. 2 weeks later, my mother hosted Sunday dinner. Half the family was there. My aunt, 2 cousins, Tyler, his girlfriend Brittany, Grandpa, neighbors who happened to stop by after church. Someone mentioned that Bennett Construction seemed busy again. My mother smiled proudly. "Oh, Richard figured everything out." Everyone congratulated my father. He accepted every compliment. I was standing at the kitchen sink, washing the roasting pan. Nobody mentioned my name. Grandpa noticed. He always noticed. When dinner ended, he quietly followed me outside while everyone else was still talking. "You signed something." I froze. "What?" "The bank." "I've been in business too long. I know that look." I looked down at the porch steps. It was necessary. For who? Our family. Grandpa stayed quiet, then asked the question nobody else ever asked. "What did you get in return?" I smiled. "A healthy company." He didn't smile back. "That's not what I asked." I couldn't answer, because the truth sounded ridiculous. I got nothing. No salary, no title, no ownership, not even a thank you that lasted longer than one afternoon. From that point on, helping became permanent. Every quarter my father called, every tax season, every payroll issue, every supplier dispute, every banking review, every insurance renewal, every financial decision somehow ended on my desk. Never officially, never publicly, always privately, usually late at night. "Clara, can you look at something?" It was never just something. One contract became 5, one report became 30. One phone call became an entire weekend. If I ever asked how long it would take, my father laughed. "You'll figure it out faster than I will." If I asked whether the company should hire someone, my mother answered before he could. "Why would we? We already have you." The strange part was that nobody considered this exploitation, least of all me. I genuinely believed families worked that way, until I started noticing something. Every success belonged to my father. Every celebration belonged to Tyler. Every crisis belonged to me. Whenever something went wrong, Dad called Clara. Whenever something went right, invite Tyler. It became a pattern impossible to ignore. One summer, I negotiated a supplier contract that saved nearly $30,000 over 2 years. That weekend, my parents hosted a barbecue. My father toasted Tyler's business instincts. Tyler hadn't even known the negotiation happened. Another time, I spent 3 straight nights rebuilding payroll after new labor regulations changed. The following Sunday, my mother proudly introduced Tyler to guests as the future president of Bennett Construction. Then she pointed toward me. "And Clara helps with paperwork." Paperwork. That's what 6 years became. Paperwork. One afternoon Tyler called me. "I can't log into the accounting system." "Which one?" Silence. "What do you mean, which one? The payroll software? The banking portal? The accounting software? The estimating platform?" "Oh, I thought it was all the same password." I laughed. I honestly thought he was joking. He wasn't. Yet somehow, that same man would eventually inherit the company, not because he understood it, because he looked like the person people expected to inherit it. Grandpa kept receiving copies of every quarterly report, not because anyone asked him to, because I mailed them myself, every 3 months, without fail. He actually read them, every page, then he called. Material costs are climbing, watch subcontractor expenses, this client pays slowly. He knew the business almost as well as I did. Maybe better. One Sunday he asked, "Does Richard read these reports?" I hesitated. "Sometimes." Grandpa chuckled. "No, he reads the first page. You write the company." Those words stayed with me. I write the company. Not own, not lead, not build. Write. Invisible work, essential work, the kind nobody notices until it disappears. About a year before the anniversary party, Grandpa asked a strange question. "If something happened to you tomorrow, who could replace you?" I answered immediately. "We'd hire someone." "No. I didn't ask who you'd hire. I asked who already knows enough," I thought. Then shook my head. "Nobody." He nodded once, exactly once. I thought so. At the time, I had no idea why he asked. Looking back, I think he already knew something I didn't, because while I was busy protecting Bennett Construction, my parents were quietly planning its future, and in their future, there was only one child standing on the stage. 3 weeks before my parents' anniversary, my mother called at 7:18 on a Thursday morning. I hadn't even poured my first cup of coffee. "Clara, good morning. I need a favor." Of course she did. "What happened?" "The florist is being difficult. The caterer changed the delivery time. The cake has to be picked up in Columbus. And Richard is overwhelmed." Translation. Everyone else had plans. I didn't. "I have work, Mom. It's only Thursday and Friday. I have clients. They'll understand." She paused, then used the sentence she always used whenever she wanted me to feel guilty. "It's our 40th anniversary. Not, can you help? Not, would you mind? Just, it's our anniversary." As if that answered everything. I looked at my calendar. 3 meetings, 1 audit, 2 client reviews. I canceled all of them. By noon, I was driving to Columbus to pick up a 4-tier cake my mother insisted couldn't possibly be trusted to anyone else. By 3, I was arguing with the florist because the eucalyptus garlands were arriving in the wrong containers. By 6, I was standing inside Millbrook Falls Community Center with a tape measure, trying to figure out why the head table wouldn't fit exactly where my mother wanted it. She arrived an hour later, walked inside, looked around, didn't say hello, didn't ask how long I'd been there. She simply scanned the room. "The flowers look smaller. They're exactly what you ordered." They looked fuller in the pictures. The sample photos used shorter vases. She frowned. "I don't like it." I called the florist. Again. Problem solved. An hour later, she found another one. "The chairs aren't symmetrical." Then, "The cake table needs another runner." Then, "The candles are too close together." Every problem somehow belonged to me. At 4 that afternoon, Tyler finally arrived. Designer sunglasses. Coffee in one hand. Car keys spinning around his finger. He looked around the room. "Wow. This actually looks nice." Actually. As if it had decorated itself, I was standing on a ladder trying to secure one of the hanging lights. "Can you hold this for a second?" He looked at his iced coffee. "I'm kind of busy." "Busy? Holding coffee?" My mother laughed. "It's okay. Clara's good at this." Tyler smiled. "You always liked the boring stuff anyway." "The boring stuff." He walked away before I answered. I watched him disappear through the front entrance. He hadn't carried a single chair, opened a single box, hung a single decoration. But in less than 5 minutes, he had already received more appreciation than I had all day. Around 6, the caterer discovered one of the kitchen circuits wasn't working. The event manager panicked. My mother immediately pointed toward me. "Ask Clara." The manager barely finished explaining before I was walking through the storage hallway, looking for the electrical panel. 20 minutes later, Dinner service was saved. Nobody applauded. Nobody even noticed, because that's the thing about invisible work. People only notice when it isn't done. By 8 that night, everything was finally ready. The lights glowed softly across the ceiling. The flowers looked beautiful. Every napkin sat perfectly folded. Every place card matched my mother's seating chart. She slowly walked around the room, examining every detail. Finally, she smiled. "This looks lovely." For one brief second, I thought she might say thank you. Instead, she handed me another clipboard. "Tomorrow morning we'll need someone here by 8. Someone. Not. Can you? Not. Would you? Just someone." We both knew who she meant. Saturday morning, 6:05 a.m. I arrived before anyone else. Again, the florist delivered fresh arrangements. I unpacked them. The bakery dropped off extra desserts. I checked the order. The rental company brought additional chairs. I counted every one. By 10 o'clock, my smartwatch showed nearly 12,000 steps. The party hadn't even started. Tyler texted the family group chat, "Running late. See everyone tonight." My mother replied with 3 heart emojis. She texted me privately 30 seconds later, "Can you steam Tyler's jacket before he gets here?" I stared at the message. Then typed back, "Tell him to bring it early." Her reply came instantly, "He's busy." I laughed. Not because it was funny, because I genuinely wondered, busy doing what? At 1 o'clock, Grandpa arrived. He stepped slowly out of his truck, carrying nothing but his cane, and that same plain brown envelope tucked under his arm. He looked around the room, then looked at me. "You been here all day?" "Since 6. What time did you leave yesterday?" "Around 9, he nodded slowly. "And Richard?" "Not yet." "Carol?" "She'll be here soon." "And Tyler?" I smiled. He texted. Grandpa didn't smile back. Instead, he quietly walked over to one of the flower arrangements, adjusted a single branch, then asked, "Did anyone thank you?" I looked away. "They're stressed." He waited. I knew better than to lie to him. "No," he simply said. I figured. Nothing more. No lecture, no sympathy. Just, I figured. That somehow hurt more, because it meant someone else could finally see what I'd stopped noticing. By 4 in the afternoon, the room was perfect. I hadn't eaten. My feet hurt. My hands were scratched from wire stems and floral tape. My mother finally arrived wearing her blue dress, hair perfect, makeup flawless. She walked directly toward the head table, looked around once, then smiled proudly. "Exactly how I imagined it," I almost said. "You're welcome." Instead, she looked at me and frowned. "You should probably go home and change." "I know." "And Clara?" "Yes, wear something simple." "Tonight isn't about you." She walked away before I could answer. Tonight never was. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, 45 minutes later, wearing a dark green dress I'd bought the week before. Nothing flashy, nothing expensive, just elegant, professional. For the first time in months, I actually felt beautiful, not because of the dress. Because I looked rested, capable. Like someone who deserved to sit at the family table. I smiled at my reflection. Maybe tonight would be different. Maybe after everything I'd done, after 6 years, after saving the company, after organizing this entire celebration, maybe tonight my parents would finally acknowledge me. Maybe. I should have known better. When I arrived back at the venue, my mother looked me up and down. "That color looks lovely." I smiled. Then she added, "Just try not to stand too close to the main backdrop." I blinked. "What?" "I want some clean family pictures before everyone starts moving around." Clean. The word landed harder than she intended. Or maybe exactly as she intended. "Who's in those pictures?" She adjusted one of her earrings. "Your father, Tyler, Brittany, the boys, and me." "What about me?" She hesitated. Only for a second. "We'll take some with you afterward." Afterward. Another word that always meant never. I nodded. Because after 33 years, I already knew how that sentence ended. Guests began arriving shortly after 7. Old neighbors, church friends, longtime clients, former employees, suppliers, people who had watched me grow up, people who smiled warmly at me, asked about work, asked about life, then immediately turned toward Tyler the moment he walked through the doors. He arrived 20 minutes late, perfect timing. Late enough for everyone to notice, early enough to become the center of attention. My mother practically ran across the room. "There they are." She hugged Brittany, kissed the grandchildren, straightened Tyler's jacket, then waved at the photographer. "Come quickly, we need family arrival pictures." I was standing less than 10 feet away, holding the updated seating chart. The photographer looked at me. "Should she—" My mother interrupted him. "Later, just immediate family first." Immediate family. I felt my fingers tighten around the clipboard. Tyler looked directly at me. For just a moment, our eyes met. He knew. Not everything, but enough. Enough to realize I wasn't being invited. He looked away, stepped beside our parents, smiled for the camera. Flash, flash, flash. I remained exactly where I was, holding paperwork, just outside the frame. Exactly where my family believed I belonged. The first person to mistake me for staff wasn't trying to insult me. He genuinely believed I worked there. One of the waiters hurried over carrying a tray of stuffed mushrooms. "Excuse me," he said. "Could you take these to table 7? I looked at him. "I'm sorry? I thought you were with the catering team." Before I could answer, my mother appeared beside us. She had heard everything. She smiled warmly at the waiter. "This is my daughter, Clara." He immediately looked embarrassed. "Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry." My mother laughed. "It's all right." Then she turned toward me. "Since you're already standing, would you mind taking those over anyway?" For 1 second, I almost said no. The word reached my throat, stopped, then disappeared. Not because I couldn't refuse, because 60 guests were watching. My father was greeting clients. Tyler was shaking hands. And once again, I convinced myself, not now. Don't make a scene. So I took the tray, walked across the room, served appetizers at my own parents' anniversary party. As I returned, I heard an older woman whisper to her husband, "She's such a helpful daughter." Helpful, another beautiful word for invisible. Dinner finally began. Or at least, everyone else started eating. Mine had gone cold before I sat down. I had barely picked up my fork when my mother appeared behind my chair. "Clara, the DJ says one of the microphones is cutting out." I looked up. "Can't someone else?" "He asked for you." Of course he did. Because everyone knew. If something wasn't working, find Clara. I put my fork down. Again, 5 minutes later the microphone worked. When I returned, my steak was cold, the mashed potatoes had hardened. Nobody had noticed I was gone. Except Grandpa. He quietly pushed his bread basket toward me. "You still haven't eaten." "I will." "When?" "Later." He looked at me for a long moment, then quietly said, "Your family uses that word too often." "Later." I smiled, because I knew exactly what he meant. Later. We'll thank you. Later. We'll recognize you. Later. We'll make it right. Later never came. Halfway through dinner, my father stood to greet several longtime clients. Every conversation somehow ended the same way. "I'd like you to meet Tyler. Our future. Our next generation. Our new leadership." Every introduction sounded rehearsed. Tyler accepted every compliment naturally, as though he'd already earned them. Meanwhile, one of Bennett Construction's oldest suppliers walked toward my table. Harold Callahan, 72 years old. He'd supplied lumber to our company for nearly 30 years. He smiled the moment he saw me. "Clara, I've been hoping to thank you." "For what?" "Last year's payment restructuring. If you hadn't suggested those quarterly adjustments, we would have had to increase prices. You saved both our businesses." I smiled politely. It worked out for everyone. Before he could say another word, my father suddenly appeared beside him. Almost too quickly. "Harold, come here. We've been looking for you." Harold looked confused. "I was just thanking Clara." Dad laughed. "She'd reorganize the whole world if we'd let her." People nearby laughed politely. He placed his hand on Harold's shoulder. "Let's talk business another day. Tonight is family." Then he walked him away. I watched them disappear. My father couldn't even let someone thank me, not publicly, never publicly. Dessert arrived. Coffee followed. The photographer announced it was time for formal portraits. My mother clapped excitedly. "Oh, wonderful." She immediately started organizing everyone. Richard, Tyler, Brittany, the boys. She adjusted jackets, straightened ties, fixed hair, then looked toward Grandpa. "Dad, come stand beside Richard." I stayed seated, waiting. Not because I expected anything anymore, because hope dies slowly. The photographer raised his camera. "Children next?" My heart skipped. My mother smiled. "Yes." Then she looked directly at Tyler. "Come stand between us." Flash, flash, flash. I remained at my table. The photographer glanced toward me. He hesitated. I thought. My mother interrupted again. "We'll do extended family later." Extended family. Not daughter. Extended. Grandpa slowly turned his head. His eyes met mine. Neither of us smiled. I quietly excused myself. Walked toward the restroom. Locked the door behind me. Rested both hands on the sink. Looked into the mirror. My makeup was still perfect. My dress still looked beautiful, but I barely recognized the woman staring back. 33 years old, CPA, financial strategist, the person who had quietly kept an entire construction company alive. Standing alone, wondering why she still wanted her mother to choose her, I laughed once, softly, mostly at myself. Then voices drifted through the partially open restroom door. My mother's, and Brittany's. "Do you think she's upset?" Brittany asked. Mom sighed. "She always gets emotional. It'll pass." "Are you sure?" "Of course. Clara likes feeling needed." Those 6 words froze me. My mother continued. "She'll complain to herself for a couple days, but she'll come back." "She always does." Brittany laughed quietly. "Tyler says the same thing. He told me Clara never actually leaves. She just needs time before she starts helping again." Neither woman knew I was standing 10 feet away, listening. Every word. I didn't cry. I didn't interrupt. I simply stood there, finally understanding something I'd never fully admitted. They weren't grateful. They were confident. Confident I'd never leave. Confident I'd never say no. Confident my loyalty was permanent. When I returned, someone else's coat rested on my chair. Brittany's. She had claimed my seat without asking. Tyler noticed me standing there. "Oh." He picked it up casually. "Sorry, I thought you were running around somewhere." Running around. Not sitting. Not eating. Running. Like staff. "It's all right," he smiled. "You've always been good at this." "Good at what?" "The details. The boring stuff. You actually enjoy this." I looked at him carefully. He wasn't mocking me. Not intentionally. That was the frightening part. He genuinely believed it. In Tyler's world, I liked serving. He liked leading. That wasn't cruelty. It was simply the family story he'd been told his entire life. And he'd never questioned it. At exactly 9:30. My mother began walking from table to table. "Dessert plates, everyone. Richard has something special to announce." "Special?" I looked toward Tyler. He suddenly looked nervous. Excited. Prepared. Prepared. That word stayed with me. He already knew. Everyone important already knew. Except me. My mother stopped beside my chair. Clara, after your father's speech, could you make sure the caterer packs the leftovers properly? I stared at her. After the speech? Yes. It'll only take a few minutes. Then she adjusted a strand of my hair. And sweetheart, smile more. You look too serious in the background of the pictures. The background, not the family, the background. I watched her walk away, then looked toward Grandpa. For the first time all evening, he wasn't watching my parents. He was watching me, and resting one hand on the brown envelope, as if he had already decided exactly when to stand up. My father tapped his champagne glass. Once. Twice. The room slowly quieted. He smiled the same polished smile that had convinced clients to sign contracts for nearly 30 years. Ladies and gentlemen, before we finish celebrating, I'd like to share something very special. He looked toward Tyler. My son has worked incredibly hard. I almost laughed. Worked. That word sounded different now. He represents the future of Bennett Construction. Applause. Again, Carol and I believe it's time for the next generation to lead. He extended his arm toward Tyler. As of today, Bennett Construction officially belongs to my son. The room exploded. People stood, glasses lifted. Someone shouted, "Congratulations, Tyler." My mother wiped tears from her face. Tyler hugged my father. Brittany was already recording everything on her phone. I stayed exactly where I was. Then I slowly raised my hand, not dramatically, not emotionally, the way I would during a board meeting. "Dad." The applause faded. He smiled politely. "Yes, Clara." I stood. "Has the ownership transfer already been approved by the bank?" Silence. Not complete, just enough for people to look at one another. My father's smile stiffened. "What do you mean?" "I mean, commercial credit agreements usually require lender approval before operational control changes." Several guests exchanged confused looks. I continued. "Has that already been completed?" My father laughed. The practiced laugh. The one he used whenever he wanted people to believe someone else was overreacting. "Clara, this isn't really the time for accounting." A few people chuckled. He looked around the room. "As you all know, my daughter enjoys details." More laughter. Then he looked directly at me. "And that's okay. Not everyone is meant to lead. Some people simply work better behind the scenes." There it was, again. This time slower, deliberate, public. My mother reached toward me. "Sweetheart, please, this is our night." I looked at Tyler. He wasn't smiling anymore. He looked confused. Then I asked one more question. "Tyler, did Dad tell you about the $60,000 personal guarantee attached to the company's credit facility?" His forehead wrinkled. "What guarantee?" I didn't answer. I looked back at my father. His face changed, just slightly. Enough. Enough for me to know. He had never told him. The room became completely still. Then, two sharp knocks echoed across the wooden floor. Tuck. Tuck. Every head turned. Grandpa slowly stood, supporting himself with his cane. The brown envelope rested beneath his arm. Nobody interrupted him. Nobody ever interrupted Walter Bennett. He looked first at my father, then at Tyler, finally at the 60 guests filling the room. "Richard," his voice was calm, "who renegotiated Bennett Construction's credit line 6 years ago?" My father swallowed. "Dad, please." I asked a question. Silence. Grandpa turned toward Tyler. "Do you know?" Tyler slowly shook his head. "No." Grandpa nodded. "I didn't think so." He opened the envelope, removed the first document, held it high enough for the front tables to see. "Clara Bennett. The bank's restructuring proposal. Signed. Approved. Implemented." He placed it on the head table, then removed another. "Who rebuilt 6 years of financial records?" No answer. "Clara." Another document. "Who negotiated supplier contracts that saved this company tens of thousands of dollars?" Silence. "Clara." Another. Who corrected payroll? Clara. Who prepared every quarterly report I've read for the past 6 years? Clara. He looked directly at my father. So tell me, Richard, what exactly has Tyler done to deserve everything? Nobody moved. Nobody even reached for their drinks. Grandpa wasn't finished. He lifted another document. This. He unfolded it carefully. The personal guarantee. He looked around the room. My granddaughter personally guaranteed $60,000 so this company wouldn't collapse. Gasps, actual gasps. One woman covered her mouth. Harold Callahan leaned forward. Several former employees stared at me in disbelief. Grandpa continued. If Bennett Construction had failed, she would have lost everything. He lowered the paper. And none of you knew. He looked at my mother. Because they never told you. Carol's eyes filled with tears. Walter, please stop. He ignored her. I watched my granddaughter organize this entire celebration. I watched her carry boxes. I watched her fix the electrical problem. I watched a waiter mistake her for catering staff. I watched her own mother hand her the tray. Several guests slowly turned toward my mother. She looked down. I watched family photographs. My granddaughter wasn't in them. I watched Richard introduce Tyler as the future, without mentioning the woman who kept that future alive. Then, for the first time all evening, Grandpa raised his voice. You called her background. You called her support. You called her someone who belonged behind the scenes. He pointed his cane toward my father. You know what she actually was? The only reason this company survived long enough for you to hand it away. Complete silence. Then, Harold Callahan slowly stood. If Walter's telling the truth, I owe Clara an apology. He looked at everyone. I thanked Richard for last year's supplier negotiations. It wasn't Richard. It was Clara. Another man stood. Dale. One of our longest-serving foremen. When payroll almost failed, Clara called every employee herself. Richard never did. Another voice. Our insurance renewal. Clara handled it. Then another. The subcontractor agreements. She negotiated those. One by one, people began speaking, not because Grandpa asked them to, because now, they understood. My father looked around the room. The image he'd spent decades protecting was collapsing, not because of a lie, because of the truth. He finally spoke. Dad. You've embarrassed this family. Grandpa answered immediately. No. You embarrassed your daughter. I merely introduced everyone to her. Then he removed the final document. My remaining 20% ownership. He placed it in front of me. Officially transfers to Clara Bennett. My father stepped forward. You can't. Grandpa looked him directly in the eyes. I already did. Signed. Notarized. Filed. Everything was finished. Tyler stared at the papers. 20%? Grandpa nodded. I don't reward appearances. I reward responsibility. Tyler slowly sat down. His hands trembled slightly. For the first time in his life, he looked overwhelmed. Not because he'd lost something, because he had finally realized how little he actually knew. The party ended less than 30 minutes later. Not officially, emotionally. People left quietly, whispering, looking at me differently than they ever had before. Not with pity, with respect. Outside, Tyler caught up with me. Clara. I stopped. I'm sorry. I looked at him. He continued. I honestly thought you liked doing all of it. I thought it made you happy. I almost smiled. Not because it was funny, because it was tragic. No. It made you comfortable. He lowered his head. I didn't know. I know. That was the problem. He never knew, because he never asked. 2 days later, I found the emails. My mother had accidentally left me copied on an old planning thread. 8 months before the anniversary. Subject. Transition plan. My mother's message read, it will be easier if Clara hears the announcement together with everyone else. If we tell her beforehand, she'll start asking about documents, the bank, ownership structure. She always complicates things. Tyler answered, She'll be upset for a few days. But she'll come around, she always does. Then came the sentence that changed everything. Clara likes feeling needed. I read it 3 times, not because I couldn't believe it, because I finally could. The following Monday, I called the bank. This is Clara Bennett. I'd like to formally withdraw my personal guarantee. The loan officer was quiet. I understand. We'll need replacement collateral. That's something the new owner will have to provide. I ended the call, then emailed my father. Professional. Simple. Following the ownership transition announced on Saturday, I have withdrawn my personal guarantee and am ending all unpaid financial work for Bennett Construction. I am available as an external consultant under contract for the next 30 days. Regards, Clara Bennett. 3 days later, my father called. For the first time in my life, he sounded afraid. The bank won't renew the credit line. I know. They need another guarantor. I know. Tyler doesn't qualify. Silence. Finally, he whispered, "What am I supposed to do?" 6 years earlier, he had asked me exactly the same question. Back then, I saved him. This time, I answered differently. Hire me. As a professional, not as a daughter, not as background, not as invisible labor, as someone whose work had value. He didn't answer. He couldn't. Because for the first time, he had to choose between his pride and reality. 6 months later, I opened my own accounting and business advisory firm. Harold became my first client, then 3 more, then 7. Grandpa attended the ribbon cutting. Tyler eventually hired an experienced controller. He actually started learning the business, slowly, honestly. My father eventually became one of my consulting clients. He signed my engagement agreement without negotiating my fee. When I walked into Bennett Construction that day, he met me at the front entrance, held the door open, and quietly said, "Thank you for coming." I smiled politely. "I'm not here to help." I set my briefcase on the conference table. "I'm here to work." For the first time in 33 years, nobody laughed, because everyone in that room finally understood something my grandfather had known all along. Being useful is not the same thing as being invisible.